I'm thankful for Jack Wood playing the piano. Why there are no Cape Codders in heaven? When I was a candidate for the ministry of this church, I visited Chatham for the first time, and Mary Chestnut summarized the place for me by saying, a lot of people think this is heaven. It's not, but a lot of people think it is. Heaven and hell, what are they, and do we make them? How do we get to the one and avoid the other? And if we live in Cape Cod, have we arrived at one and avoided the other? The songs that I offered this morning are sort of bookends on this question. The song by sandwich poet Russell K. Tucker asserts that this sweet hook of the continent out into the Atlantic is in fact a bit of heaven. So much so that Cape Codders who go to the real heaven never stay there. The song by Fred Kohler argues that we create our own hells and pictures particular folks having to live in the hells they created for others. Let me just take this up. Some of you may be surprised to find a UU minister wanting to talk about such a subject. For many of you will think we have transcended concerns with heaven and hell. And if we take these terms literally, as places we might go when we die, I would agree. The Universalists took it as an article of faith that God was too good to damn anyone to eternal torment. And some modern Christian evangelists, including the popular Rob Bell, are coming around to agree with this position. So as a literal place of eternal torment to which people might go after they die, we can agree for today's purposes that there is no hell. What about heaven? Many of us do not believe that there is any kind of afterlife. My own position was captured by a lapel button I once saw that said, militant agnostic, I don't know and you don't either. Hamlet called death the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. And he wasn't talking about the bridge to Cape Cod. We simply don't know what awaits us on the other side of that journey we all must take. But that has to stop us from creating and trying to create hells and heavens on earth, and that is what I want to talk about this morning. Whether we personally believe in any kind of afterlife, the images of hell and heaven, the ideas of salvation and damnation permeate our culture. The stories we tell each other usually end up with the hero winning or losing. Heaven and hell are deeply enmeshed in the warp and woof of our thought. I'm told that 2 weeks ago, from this pulpit, my colleague Dan Schatz offered you a compliment on my concertina playing. I'm thrilled to hear it, because concertina players get few enough compliments in their own lifetime. As we squeeze through life, we're reminded that for every person who thinks it's a neat sound, there are at least as many, and probably many more, for whom the sound is irritating, if not excruciatingly bad. But this compliment reminds me of a major theological question, which I perceived a few years ago, posed by a collection of squeeze boxes. There's a big gathering called the Northeast Squeeze In that happens every year in September in the Berkshires. The first time I went there, I walked into the lounge of this little country inn, and there were 50 accordions and concertinas going full blast. And the theological question that popped irresistibly up to the surface of my mind was, have I arrived in heaven or hell? For it was heaven for me, but I knew that for most music lovers it would be hell. Can the same thing be both heaven and hell? In one sense, that's an inappropriate question. Yes, 50 accordions and concertinas going full blast would be hell for many people. But those people would not be likely to show up at the Northeast Squeeze In. I traveled for hours to get together with my fellow free read enthusiasts. Nobody trapped me into going. So what made it happen for me was that it was my own choice that brought me there. Where we come to at any point in life, this may be obvious, but I never refrain from stating the obvious. Where we come to at any point in life is a result of two factors. choices we have made, and circumstances beyond our control. The choices have consequences, some of which are intended and others unintended. The circumstances beyond our control often dictate the range of choices available to us. And as we make choices, we seek to maximize our pleasure and minimize our pain. Nothing wrong with that, except that everyone else is doing it at the same time. When you factor in the choices that everyone else makes, you see that you can point towards heaven and end up in hell. If your idea of a place to spend a pleasant week of vacation, for example, is Cape Cod, it might be heaven. If everyone else in the country decides to do the same thing in the same week, it can turn into hell. Many people who live cheerfully in this part of the Cape year-round decide to rent out their houses and leave town in July and August to avoid the traffic and congestion. It is often the case, in other words, that pursuing heaven for oneself can make hell for others. And the song by Fred Kohler that John and I sang is full of examples of people who by their actions have created hells for others. And the irony of this song is, what if the people who cause the suffering were to be the ones themselves to suffer? What if the bartender drowned in his rot-gut gin? What if the irresponsible rake had to raise the children he fathered as a single parent? What if the politicians who made the decision to go to war were the ones who had to fight them? These scenes are fun to contemplate because we have a sense that justice would be done if those who caused the suffering were made to suffer themselves. But we know that the hell created for others is only one kind of hell. More common and probably of more immediate concern are the hells we create for ourselves. We quit the job. We had an affair. We spent the rent money on a new boat. We didn't file our taxes. We told a lie and then had to tell another lie to cover that one. We started a war we couldn't see the end of. We lit a match in a gas tank. We are often the victims of our own misdeeds and create hell for ourselves. So as the hells we create and the hells others create for us, but even besides those, I want to mention a third type, a third circle of hell on earth, if you will, the hell that just happens. We may come down with a serious illness or disability. We may have a run of bad luck. The bank went bust with all our money in it. We might have played all our cards right and landed in hell anyway. But beyond these, hell can occur even without any misdoing on our part and even without bad luck. There is a certain hell that just proceeds from the fact that we are beings living in time. I'd call this existential hell, for want of a better word. We become attached to people, places, and things, and then the stream of time moves on and they are taken from us. We go through our lives being separated from the things we love, and this loss adds up. It is no wonder that many people conceive of heaven as the place that will finally be reunited with all the friends and relatives they have lost. My first wife once wrote a poem imagining that in heaven I would be reunited with all the hats I'd misplaced in my life. Mostly, of course, we try to avoid hell, but there are certain times we intentionally set out to create hell. If you've ever been inside a jail or prison, as I have many times as a criminal defense lawyer, you can see what a designer hell looks like. In Phoenix in June, I and 2,500 other UUs stood outside Sheriff Joe Arpaio's tent city protesting hellish conditions for the immigration detainees inside. So though we reject the hell in the hereafter, we often experience hells in the here and now, and there are many ways of getting there. Not all involve handbaskets. Now, a few words on heaven. Besides imagining heaven in the hereafter, we also intentionally build heavens on earth. For some people, heaven is a beautiful green golf course. And so some private developers, particularly in the South, but starting now in New England, build subdivisions with golf courses in the middle. But there's this tricky thing about designing heaven. Sometimes the heaven we intend to create turns out really to be hell. Russell Tucker's song asserts that Cape Cod is so heavenly that Cape Codders won't stay in the real heaven, but insist on hiking their way back here. That's a cute idea. It may have represented Cape Cod when it was written a century ago. But what has happened in the intervening years is that Cape Cod has become a victim of its own attractiveness. It is not only a prime vacation destination, but is now a prime retirement destination. You've seen the old pictures of Chatham. Some of you old-timers can actually remember it. Not 50 years ago, I'm told, you could see from Oyster Pond to Riders Cove, because the town was practically treeless, a barren strip of land. It has come back, of course, in modern times as an oasis on the elbow, a lush place of manicured lawns and graceful trees, a sort of heaven. For many of you sitting in these pews, Chatham is your reward for having played your cards right in New Jersey or Connecticut or Boston. People who didn't play their cards right had to spend the remainder of their lives in Hoboken or Bridgeport or Dorchester. You made it to Chatham. Congratulations. And the result of the great influx of relatively affluent retirees to the Cape in the last 30 years is that the price of real estate has gone up beyond the means of young families who are being squeezed out. So you can find a heaven of natural beauty, as well as golf courses and fishing and water sports and whatever else you might want, but you will enter a generational ghetto in which the laughter of children will be largely absent outside of the months of July and August. And when you come, as many do, to the point when you can't live unassisted, you will be faced with the choice of an institution here or moving off Cape to be near your wage-earning children. In other words, the pursuit of heaven on earth often creates hell as an unintended consequence. This was true of some utopian communities of the 19th century. Let's take Fruitlands, which was intended to be a transcendentalist heaven. Bronson Alcott took his family out from Concord to this farm in rural Harvard, Massachusetts, to shed all the trappings of civilization which he thought stood between him and the ultimate. It was supposed to be a Garden of Eden, but the burden fell on Louisa and her mother and sisters to try to make the necessities of life out of less and less. And finally starving, they gave up the experiment and moved back to town. Bronson Alcott set out to create a heaven and ended up creating a hell. Traditionally conceived, hell is separation from God, and heaven is closeness or union with God. But God, as I conceive it, is not just a disembodied spirit we've never encountered before. God is the word I use for the point of origin of all that exists, including ourselves. So as traditionally conceived in going to heaven, we would have a sense that we're going home. Dante's sense of paradiso, more is permitted to our powers there than is permitted here by virtue of that place made for mankind as its true home. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, "Congratulations to those who are alone and chosen, for you will find the kingdom, for you have come from it, and you will return there again." So in our religious traditions, heaven carries the connotation of our home, and yet the kingdom of heaven is also within us. When we connect to the source of being, to our point of origin, by whatever name we call it, we're creating heaven and we're going home. Sometimes fate seems to be aware of the ideas I'm struggling with as I wrestle with the sermon topic and sends me just the right message to help me along. It happened this week, on Thursday, when a very moving opinion piece appeared in the Cape Cod Times by a man named Andy Dietland, who lives just off Cape in Carver. He's found a heaven on Cape Cod, but it is not the golf courses or beaches. Here's what he says. There's no place like Cape Cod. Once on the Cape, there's a relief from life's cares left on the other side of the Sagamore and Bourne bridges. People often say they've fallen in love with Cape Cod, the beaches, the seafood, the quaint villages. A sunrise over the national seashore is enough to quiet the most restless soul. 4 years ago, I too fell in love with Cape Cod. This is Andy Dietland talking. Fell in love with Cape Cod, but with an important part of it not often mentioned. It's daycares and homeless shelters. I spent most of my life in Plymouth and now live in Carver. After I retired as Plymouth's high school Latin teacher and as a captain on the town's excursion boats, I took a job driving infants and toddlers to daycare in an 8-passenger school van. My roots began in the Plymouth area, but eventually I was sent to the towns of Cape Cod. I couldn't believe my luck. I'd always wanted to tour the Cape, and here I was doing it with the best of company. I finally found a crowd I could get along with. Over the next few years, I must have visited most of the daycares and homeless shelters on the Cape, from Bourne to Sandwich, to North and East Falmouth, down to Forestdale, Marston's Mills, Mashpee, Hyannis, Yarmouth, Lower County Road to Dennisport. The homes of the toddlers took me to many of those places. It was a fascinating tour. Many daycare owners and operators had come from Brazil and the Azores, hardworking people of faith who maintained their daycares in pristine condition. And rare was the day when a child was not eager to jump out of the van and run into the daycare. The workers in the homeless shelters were saints. Their job was to help parents get onto their own feet in a job or take classes leading to a job, while I took their babies to a private home daycare run by a mother with children of her own. I saw this plan work many times. I recall one scene in particular. I was paying my last visit to a family at the rented apartment they had just moved into. Their little daughter came running out, all excited, yelling, "Andy, Andy, me and the baby got our own room. Come and see it." I was in my early 80s when I drove that van, and I never felt the presence of God more closely, not even in church, than when I was motoring through the Cape traffic with every seat occupied. It was sublime. One religious theory, this is still Andy talking, one religious theory claims that man's never-ending search for permanent happiness springs from an innate desire to return to God's presence from the day we are born. St. Augustine put it best, "O Lord, our hearts are restless until they rest in Thee." Whether true or not, it's a good explanation for why those who seem to have everything turn their lives into a hell looking for more. Nevertheless, all I can say is that as I came as close as I ever did, working with the daycares and homeless shelters in Cape Cod, unquote. Andy Dietland, like so many others before him, found that heaven was not a place of pleasure, not a place of accumulation of things, but a place of service to others, of helping other people navigate their lives. Andy Dietland is not looking for heaven to be a place of perfection, or a place where all problems are solved, all loneliness overcome, all accounts settled. He finds heaven in working with the world the way it is. And so can we. In the popular imagination, heaven is the place where we shed all the negatives of life, the separation, the pain, the suffering. All the desires are fulfilled. Around the time of the attacks of 9/11, there was a lot of speculation in the popular press that the conspirators believed that when they got to heaven after their deed, they would be rewarded with 17 virgins apiece for their own pleasure. I'm not sure whether this was serious theology or just anti-Muslim bias in the U.S. press, but my first reaction is revulsion at a scheme in which we put women in subservience to men's desires, i.e. it couldn't be much of a picnic for the virgins involved. What might be heaven for the men would be hell for the women. My second reaction is surprise that any kind of sex drive would be operational in a place where we don't have bodies. But you see where this is headed. The sex drive itself in our lives is often claimed to bring us as near heaven as we get on this earth, but it is also the cause of much suffering. It has a dual aspect. It's like fire, something indispensable which can yet do a lot of damage. Come to think of it, so do many of the things we encounter in life. They can be used for good or ill. Take fossil fuels. They make possible an unprecedented lifestyle of great power and joy. Life as we have come to know it in modern industrial civilization would be impossible without fossil fuels. Yet out of this heaven, we are steadily creating our own hell. And if climate change is allowed to continue, not only will this precious sandbar be underwater, but life everywhere will be very much harder and less pleasant for our grandchildren and their grandchildren. From a Buddhist point of view, hell is samsara, being caught in the endless cycle of desire and attachment. When we pursue the path to enlightenment, we may enter into nirvana, which is the overcoming of desire and attachment. Note, not the fulfilling of desire, the overcoming of desire. But at the most advanced stages of enlightenment, the Buddhist sage realizes that samsara and nirvana are the same thing. What is important is to overcome delusions and to see clearly what is. And the reality is that life is composed of happiness and suffering. As William Blake tells us, joy and woe are woven fine. The Buddha's first noble truth is that dukkha is everywhere. Dukkha is often translated as suffering, but a more exact translation is unsatisfactoriness. There's a connotation in the word of a wheel which is out of truth. Have you ever tried to ride a bicycle with a warped wheel? This is a metaphor for how life is at its best. You will always be able to find some bit of dukkha, some imperfection in real life. I don't know what it would be in an afterlife, but I know that this life is an alloy, an amalgam. There's no such thing as perfection, and thank goodness. Imperfection is one of our greatest blessings. Orthodox theology, getting into the Christian frame of things, follows St. Paul and postulates that there was a heaven on earth called Eden. And we fell from grace and spent thousands of years trying to crawl back into that garden. Orthodox theology, in other words, measures down. It says, look how far we have fallen below Eden. Universalism, on the other hand, has always measured up. It says, look how far we've come from the state of nature, from the state of the war of all against all. Look at what cooperation, science, technology, medicine, civilization has brought us. We move closer to the divine every day. We'll always have dukkha. It's built into the system. Mr. Kemper's song holds that there are no Cape Codders in heaven because heaven is in Cape Cod. And he even found Cape Cod heaven because he found God in the homeless shelters and daycare centers. Some of us may find the divine in our bays and estuaries or our deep ravines. The song we sang just before this sermon says heaven is in this place. And it is, in this place, and every place, if we know how to recognize it. Amen.